What if everything we've been told about Meghan Markle's pregnancies was a lie? Piers Morgan just dropped a bombshell that will change everything you thought you knew. In an exclusive interview that's shaking the royal world, Piers Morgan claims multiple sources from inside the palace have confirmed a shocking secret about Meghan Markle's pregnancies. According to Morgan, Meghan didn't carry either of her children, and staged photos were taken to create a false narrative for the public. Why would Meghan go to such lengths? And what could this mean for her relationship with the royal family? Stay tuned as we dive deep into the claims that could shatter her carefully crafted image. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. The moment Piers Morgan sat back in his studio chair and uttered the words, "She never carried those children," everything changed. The audience, the producers, even seasoned journalists in the control room froze. For a man known to stir controversy and say what others dare not say, this was different. This wasn't just a jab at Meghan Markle. It was a direct, calculated, and absolutely shocking accusation, one that, if true, had the power to shake the entire foundation of the British monarchy and cast a permanent shadow over two royal children's legitimacy. It wasn't a tabloid rumor. It wasn't whispered in the shadows of anonymous blogs or encrypted forums. This came from one of the loudest media voices in the UK, someone who had, over the years, cultivated both admiration and loathing in equal measure. Piers Morgan was no stranger to feuds with the Duchess of Sussex, but this time, he wasn't just airing his skepticism, he claimed to be backed by multiple palace sources. The assertion? Meghan Markle had allegedly never been pregnant at all. Not with Archie. Not with Lilibet. Instead, Morgan alleged she orchestrated a masterful charade to make it appear she carried both children, while behind the scenes, surrogate arrangements took place in utter secrecy. But the real shock wasn't just in the accusation. It was in the delivery. It was in the quiet conviction with which Piers presented it. No shouting, no over-the-top gestures. Just a calm, loaded statement that carried the weight of years of tension, whispers, photos, and doubts. He didn't present it like a theory. He presented it like a truth that had been hidden too long. And perhaps most unsettling of all, no one from Buckingham Palace, Clarence House, or even Harry and Meghan's PR machine came forward with immediate legal threats or retractions. The silence that followed was deafening. In that moment, headlines erupted across the world. Social media timelines exploded. Hashtags like #SurrogateGate, #Meghan lied, and #Royal Deception began trending. Overnight, TikTok sleuths, body language experts, photographers, and even nurses came forward to either support or debunk the claim. But one thing became clear. Piers Morgan had forced a conversation the royal family had long been trying to keep buried. And he wasn't backing down. So, what led up to this? What gave Piers Morgan the conviction, and perhaps the audacity, to make such a bold public statement? This video takes you through the entire unraveling of what some call the most orchestrated deception in modern royal history. We'll walk through the visual inconsistencies that have haunted Meghan's pregnancy photos. We'll revisit moments on television where bumps folded, moved, and morphed in ways that had midwives scratching their heads. We'll unpack how palace insiders, many of whom remained anonymous for fear of retaliation, allegedly gave information confirming Piers' claims. But we'll also go further, questioning why the royal family refused to confirm the hospitals where Meghan gave birth, why birth certificates were filed under suspicious timing, and why no photographic evidence exists of her entering or exiting a maternity ward. We'll explore the ethics of public deception, the legal implications of surrogacy and royal lineage, and the profound question: if this was staged, what else have we been sold? Yet, none of this began in isolation. This controversy is the culmination of years of calculated press strategy, divided public opinion, and an ever-evolving narrative around the Sussexes. From the beginning, Meghan Markle was presented as the fresh, modern face the monarchy desperately needed. An American actress, biracial, feminist, confident, the perfect foil to a monarchy that many felt was outdated and stiff. When she and Harry announced their first pregnancy in 2018, the news was met with overwhelming joy. It was supposed to be a new chapter, a symbol of unity, diversity, and progress. But even in that joy, something felt curated. The bumps seemed to appear and disappear in ways that defied normal gestation. At one event, Meghan was nearly flat-stomached. Just days later, she appeared heavily pregnant. Cameras captured what looked like her baby bump collapsing as she bent down to sit. Commenters noticed she often clutched it protectively even during interviews, performances some said were too performative. Still, most people chalked it up to camera angles, lighting, or the natural variance in pregnancy. Now, in light of Piers Morgan's statement, these inconsistencies are being re-examined under a much more critical lens. Was the public fooled? Were royal advisors complicit? Was Harry fully aware, or part of a cover-up? Or is this just another layer in a feud between a tabloid-baiting journalist and a duchess who walked away from the crown? The middle of this story is filled with layers of denial, silence, and contradiction. Media outlets that once published puff pieces on Meghan's glowing maternity style are now quietly updating articles, removing unverified photos, or noting that no official hospital statements were ever made regarding Lilibet's birth. Even the birth announcement came not from the palace, but from the couple's own Archewell Foundation, further distancing themselves from royal tradition and scrutiny. Questions mount. Why was no image released of Meghan holding Lilibet immediately after birth, as is customary? Why was Lilibet born in the U.S., far from royal medical staff? Why are there no clear hospital records or photos? For two children who are technically in the royal line of succession, why are their early days cloaked in mystery? And then, there's the Oprah interview. When Harry and Meghan sat down with Oprah Winfrey in 2021, the world was watching. Every gesture, every facial expression, every pause carried weight. Meghan made it a point to highlight her motherhood journey. She spoke of baby kicks, of nursery preparations, of fears and joy. But was it all rehearsed? Was it the performance of a lifetime? For Piers Morgan, the answer is yes. And he's not alone. A growing number of voices, from former palace employees to Hollywood insiders, are stepping forward to say something has never added up. Some speak on background. Others use pseudonyms. But the pattern is unmistakable. More and more people are willing to say what was once unthinkable. The ending of this story is not yet written. There's no confession, no DNA test, no royal press release clarifying the events. But there is momentum. There is scrutiny. And there is outrage. This video will take you inside the whispers, the warnings, the documents, and the alleged manipulation that's rocked two continents. Whether you believe Meghan is the victim of relentless press harassment or a master manipulator rewriting history to her advantage, one thing is certain: the truth, whatever it may be, deserves to be told. Let's dive into it. To understand the gravity of what Piers Morgan said, you must go back to the history of royal pregnancies and how they've always been handled, with precision, ceremony, and documentation. When Princess Diana gave birth to Prince William and Prince Harry, she was seen entering the hospital. Crowds waited for days. Press surrounded St. Mary's Hospital, and when the moment finally came, Charles stepped out, beaming, and Diana emerged with the newborn swaddled in her arms. There were no doubts. No missing files. No mystery. Compare that to Meghan's story. When Archie was born, the world was told he came in the early morning hours of May 6, 2019. The couple released a press statement hours after the birth, noting the baby boy's arrival. Yet, no one saw Meghan enter the hospital. No one could confirm she was even in labor. Conflicting reports swirled. Some said she gave birth at Portland Hospital in London. Others suggested a home birth. The palace remained deliberately vague, and journalists were told not to ask too many questions. The photographs of Meghan and Harry presenting Archie to the world were taken inside Windsor Castle, not on hospital steps, not in front of flashing cameras like every royal child before him. Meghan, in a white dress, clutched her baby with a carefully composed smile. Harry stood beside her, protective yet subdued. But eagle-eyed viewers noticed something strange. The baby's head size didn't match a newborn. Meghan's body didn't reflect the exhaustion or swelling of recent labor. She looked polished, rested, glowing. And there were no hospital staff, no doctors, no midwives. Just Meghan, Harry, and a baby whose birth details were already beginning to raise eyebrows. In the months that followed, Meghan's appearances reignited speculation. There were clips where her baby bump seemed to shift unnaturally. Fabric moved in odd ways. In one instance, as she sat down during a televised event, her bump appeared to fold. Doctors online tried to explain it. Perhaps it was the dress. Perhaps she was carrying differently. But speculation never died. It merely simmered beneath the surface. Royal fans started uploading side-by-side photos. One day Meghan looked 7 months pregnant. The next, she looked barely showing. There was no consistency, no transparency, and no attempt from the palace to dispel rumors. Fast forward to Lilibet Diana Mountbatten Windsor's birth in June 2021. Born in California, the couple claimed the baby arrived via a peaceful birth at Santa Barbara Cottage Hospital. No official photos. No public record. No documentation released beyond a press statement. Once again, the details were vague, and the press was kept at arm's length. Days went by before the couple shared a single black and white photo of the baby, digitally altered to match the aesthetic of their brand. By now, critics were no longer silent. Commentators began questioning the narrative. Why all the secrecy? Why the absence of medical professional statements? Why were birth certificates edited and released under odd circumstances? And why did Meghan, someone so media-savvy, avoid every single traditional photo op that accompanies royal births? But no one dared say what PIERS said. Until now. The reason this moment feels so seismic is because it crosses an unspoken line. Surrogacy is not illegal, nor is it shameful. But in the context of royalty, where bloodlines, lineage, and succession matter immensely, pretending to have given birth when one has not, if true, is a scandal of historical proportions. It would mean the public was misled on matters of constitutional significance. And if this was covered up, it begs a darker question. Who else knew? Did palace officials collude? Was Harry aware from the beginning? Were other royals silently complicit? Piers Morgan, in his now infamous segment, made it clear he wasn't simply speculating. He cited what he called undeniable information from royal insiders, staffers who had allegedly witnessed discrepancies and were bound by NDAs. According to Piers, some were hospital-affiliated personnel who could not reconcile the timeline of Meghan's labor story. Others were royal aides tasked with handling security and logistics, who noticed inconsistencies during travel and events. Still others were former employees, now free to speak. The most chose anonymity. What Piers didn't say outright, but implied with his characteristic intensity, was that this may have been part of a much larger strategy. Meghan and Harry, since stepping back from their royal duties, have been crafting a new image. As advocates, as underdogs, as survivors of an oppressive institution. Their pregnancy stories were central to that narrative. The trials Meghan claimed she endured while carrying Archie, the isolation, the racism, the despair, were major emotional beats in their Netflix documentary and Oprah interview. If those stories were built on a lie, the fallout would go far beyond palace gossip. It would affect millions of supporters who rallied to their cause. This story also strikes at the heart of media ethics. Meghan and Harry frequently lambasted the press for invasiveness, yet they courted media attention when it suited them. They demanded privacy, then signed multi-million-dollar content deals. They avoided the royal rota system, then released curated, controlled imagery on their own terms. This selective engagement has long frustrated journalists, and some argue it's enabled them to hide the truth. By accusing Meghan of surrogacy deception, Piers isn't just taking a swipe at her. He's challenging the entire apparatus around her. PR teams, publicists, brand consultants, and even institutions like Netflix and Spotify. All of them, in his eyes, may have played a role in perpetuating a false image. And if that's true, then the lie goes deeper than anyone imagined. Yet despite the media storm, Harry and Meghan have issued no legal notice. No denials. No interviews to clear their names. Some say it's because they don't want to dignify the claim. Others believe it's because they can't. And so, the public is left to fill in the gaps. Online forums now feature detailed photo analyses. Experts are being invited onto YouTube channels and podcasts to break down video footage frame by frame. Doctors are weighing in on what a post-pregnancy body typically looks like. Photographers who've worked with royals are sharing inside information on how photo shoots are staged. Even former royal protection officers have chimed in. One noting that they were never given the task of securing a maternity wing for Meghan, something that would be standard procedure for a royal birth. The court of public opinion is in session. But unlike other controversies, this one is not likely to fade. The story touches on children, lineage, and trust. It pierces through layers of curated branding and hits at the very core of what people believe to be real and authentic. And it's made worse by the fact that the targets of this scrutiny, Harry and Meghan, have built their entire narrative on being the ones telling the truth. But whose truth? This video does not claim to know all the answers. But it does ask the questions no one else will. Why have there been no hospital confirmations? Why are there no maternity ward photos? Why did the royal family allow this degree of secrecy? And what does it mean for the future of the monarchy if Meghan indeed used a surrogate and covered it up? Was this a betrayal of trust? Or a deeply personal decision that spiraled out of control? Was this a PR campaign gone wrong? Or a deliberate strategy designed to manipulate the narrative? These questions are no longer whispered. They're shouted. And with Piers Morgan igniting the match, there's no putting this fire out. Let's examine the evidence. Let's question the inconsistencies. Let's uncover what was hidden in plain sight. Because whether you believe Meghan Markle or you believe Piers Morgan, this story is no longer about tabloid headlines. It's about the line between public truth and private fiction, and what happens when that line is finally crossed. In October 2018, Kensington Palace issued an official statement that sent shockwaves through the media and royal watchers around the globe. Just as Prince Harry and Meghan Markle arrived in Sydney, Australia, for their highly publicized royal tour, the announcement came: Meghan was pregnant. The timing felt almost too perfect. The couple had only been married for 5 months. The royal family was eager for a public relations win. Meghan, fresh off a honeymoon period, had already made headlines for her modern approach, outspoken nature, and undeniable charisma. This pregnancy news seemed to cement her role in the monarchy as a woman of the future. She would be the American-born Duchess carrying the next royal generation. From that moment on, her public pregnancy became more than just a biological milestone. It became a media event, a brand asset, and, according to critics, a carefully choreographed campaign. Every appearance Meghan made during the pregnancy was covered in extensive detail. Her fashion choices became the subject of glossy magazine spreads. Her growing bump was tracked religiously by both fans and skeptics. Headlines praised her maternal glow and the fresh, diverse energy she brought to the royal family. It was a public spectacle, but one that didn't unfold without raising a few eyebrows. At the time, the excitement overshadowed what some quietly began to notice. Meghan's baby bump, for instance, seemed inconsistent in its size and shape. During one appearance at the National Theatre in January 2019, her silhouette was noticeably smaller than it had been just a week prior at another engagement. On another occasion in March, at a panel discussion for International Women's Day, Meghan appeared to be in her final trimester, but some observers commented that her stomach seemed oddly high for someone due in a matter of weeks. Still, the speculation remained confined to the fringes. Then came the infamous moment at the British Fashion Awards in December 2018. Meghan made a surprise appearance, cradling her belly in a tight black gown. Social media erupted. Her hands never left the bump. Every camera flash captured her in the same pose. Commentators started to note the frequency with which Meghan was photographed holding her stomach. A gesture she claimed was natural and protective, but which critics began labeling as theatrical. In some clips, the baby bump even appeared to move in ways that defied normal anatomy. These subtle oddities sparked the beginnings of a controversy that would simmer for years. Despite this, Meghan and Harry kept up appearances. They attended events, smiled for cameras, and issued vague updates about the pregnancy. When questions arose about where the baby would be born or which hospital she planned to use, Meghan broke with royal tradition by keeping those details private. Whereas Princess Diana gave birth in the full view of the world, and Kate Middleton stood on the steps of St. Mary's Hospital just hours after delivery for all 3 of her children, Meghan announced early on that she wouldn't be following the same path. Instead of appearing outside a hospital with a newborn in her arms, Meghan and Harry would celebrate privately. When the baby arrived, they would share the news in their own time. To the public, this seemed like a break from excessive intrusion. To royal observers, however, it raised red flags. When Archie's birth was finally announced, confusion reigned. Buckingham Palace initially claimed Meghan had gone into labor in the early hours of the morning. Just hours later, another statement claimed the baby had already been born. Reporters rushed to hospitals across London, only to find no signs of activity. Eventually, it was revealed that Meghan had given birth in Portland Hospital, a private facility favored by celebrities. But the timeline didn't match, nor did the secrecy. Even more puzzling was the couple's decision to stage the first baby photo inside Windsor Castle, 2 days after the birth. Meghan appeared in a white, button-down dress, smiling alongside Prince Harry. Yet, seasoned photographers noted that her appearance seemed unusually polished for a woman just 48 hours postpartum. There was no puffiness, no signs of swelling, no physical indications of labor or surgery. Meghan looked poised, clean, and perfectly styled. Some mothers, watching at home, began to ask uncomfortable questions. How was it possible that she looked runway-ready after childbirth? Why was there no visible support staff, no doctor, nurse, or midwife beside her? And then there was the baby himself. Archie, wrapped tightly in a white blanket, never stirred. His face was barely visible. He appeared larger than expected for a newborn. Even his complexion raised speculation, though people hesitated to say it out loud. The whispers, however, grew louder in online communities. Was this really a 2-day-old baby? Was this staged? Still, the couple moved forward. Meghan spoke glowingly about motherhood. She shared stories of sleepless nights, of feeding and swaddling. Harry beamed in interviews, telling reporters he was in awe of what women go through during childbirth. But again, Meghan never spoke in specific terms. There were no intimate details about the labor process. No descriptions of contractions, of hospital staff, or of delivery day experiences. Compared to Kate, who always thanked the midwives and mentioned the hospital by name, Meghan's recollections were vague, perhaps overly curated. As Archie grew, he remained mostly out of the spotlight. The Sussexes released occasional photos, often showing only the back of his head or his feet. At times, he was bundled in shadows or heavily filtered black and white images. When asked about their decision to withhold full photos, the couple cited a need for privacy. But critics argued that the selective exposure was another way to control the narrative, to avoid scrutiny, and possibly to protect a secret. The second pregnancy brought even more intrigue. In February 2021, Meghan and Harry announced they were expecting a second child through a stylized black and white photo taken by a friend via iPad. The image showed Meghan lying on Harry's lap in a garden, cradling her belly. She wore a flowing dress, her expression serene. The bump appeared prominent. The media, again, celebrated. But this time, the speculation began almost immediately. Why release such a stylized, vague image? Why now? The announcement came just days before Valentine's Day, coincidentally mirroring the exact timing Princess Diana had chosen to reveal her pregnancy with Harry. Was this homage or manipulation? Shortly after the announcement, the couple revealed that Meghan had suffered a miscarriage months earlier. The revelation came via a New York Times op-ed, written in Meghan's voice. She described the pain of losing a child, the experience of watching Harry's heartbreak, and the quiet grief that followed. The article was poignant, raw, emotional, yet it also seemed perfectly timed to reset the public narrative before Lilibet's arrival. When Lilibet Diana was born on June 4, 2021, the questions escalated. Born in California, at Santa Barbara Cottage Hospital, the birth announcement came not from the palace, but from Archwell, the couple's personal foundation. There were no photos, no hospital footage, no official records shared. Not even a birth certificate was released immediately. And Meghan, once again, disappeared from public view. Weeks later, a photo of the family surfaced. Meghan, Harry, Archie, and Lilibet sat on steps, all smiling. The image was clearly staged. The lighting, the poses, even the color palette all matched their brand aesthetic. Lilibet looked much older than her birth date would suggest. Again, her face was only partially visible. Critics began asking if the baby had even been born when they said, was the photo a stock image? Was it even the real child? At the center of this unfolding drama was the growing suspicion that something wasn't right. Now, with Piers Morgan throwing fuel on the fire, every moment from those pregnancies is being re-examined. Meghan's choice to remain vague about her birth plans, her rejection of royal maternity norms, the lack of medical transparency, the inconsistencies in photos, the perfectly curated, tightly controlled images released only through their private platforms. All of it looks different now. Some still defend Meghan fiercely. They argue she was under immense pressure, dealing with racism, scrutiny, and the stifling rules of a royal system that never accepted her. They say she had every right to control her narrative, to protect her privacy, to shield her children. But others say that privacy doesn't give someone the right to deceive, especially not when those children hold places in the royal succession. The truth may still be buried beneath contracts, non-disclosure agreements, and polished PR statements. But what's clear is this. Meghan Markle's pregnancy journey was not just a medical event. It was a performance. Whether authentic or orchestrated, it was crafted with precision. Every photo, every word, every gesture was filtered through a lens of control. And now, With allegations of surrogacy and deception hanging in the air, the entire narrative is cracking. What remains is a public desperate for answers. In a media world saturated with sensationalism, it's difficult to separate fact from theater. But every now and then, something happens that transcends clickbait. When Piers Morgan, seated comfortably in front of millions of viewers, declared that multiple palace sources had confirmed Meghan Markle never carried her children, the moment split public opinion down the middle. For some, it was outrageous and offensive. For others, it was the confirmation they had suspected all along. Piers Morgan has never hidden his disdain for Meghan Markle. Their feud, once personal and rooted in their own broken friendship, has since grown into something emblematic, a culture war symbol where Piers stands as the voice of traditional values, and Meghan as the figure challenging institutional norms. But even for Piers, this allegation was another level entirely. This wasn't about Meghan's personality or work ethic or perceived ingratitude. This was about alleged deception at the highest level of public trust. According to Piers, the claim wasn't a guess or baseless conspiracy. It was sourced, he insisted, from individuals inside the royal machine. People who had seen enough behind the scenes to raise doubts and, eventually, speak out. He said these sources weren't rogue staffers with a grudge or gossip-hungry opportunists. They were people who had been deeply involved in the planning, security, and media coordination surrounding Meghan's pregnancies. And what they witnessed, Piers claimed, did not align with the public narrative. One of the most compelling pieces of his statement came in the form of a timeline. Piers didn't just say Meghan lied about being pregnant. He laid out a sequence of events, moments where palace staff were instructed to handle logistics in a way that contradicted standard protocol. He mentioned the absence of hospital pre-briefings, the lack of usual security checks for a royal birth location, and sudden changes in Meghan's schedule that didn't match the expected timeline for a woman in late-stage pregnancy. One source, Piers noted, was allegedly involved in arranging Meghan's travel and accommodations during her third trimester. According to this insider, there were inconsistencies that couldn't be explained. For instance, Meghan was seen boarding and exiting vehicles with ease, bending down without discomfort, and engaging in back-to-back engagements without signs of physical fatigue. While every pregnancy is different, this insider was puzzled by the discrepancy between Meghan's energetic demeanor and what would typically be expected at such an advanced stage. Another source was reportedly assigned to coordinate press access around the anticipated birth of Archie. Traditionally, press officers notify select media outlets when a royal is admitted to hospital. But in this case, nothing happened. There were no notices sent, no media zones created, and no photographers stationed. Instead, the birth was announced retroactively, as if it had happened in secret. The insider claimed that even senior press members at the palace were left in the dark and had to scramble to issue statements hours after the fact. Piers then spoke about a former staffer who had since resigned and moved abroad. According to Morgan, this individual contacted him after growing tired of the silence. They expressed concern about having signed strict non-disclosure agreements, but felt morally obligated to share what they knew. The staffer recalled conversations within palace walls, whispers among aides and logistical team members about the peculiar planning around the birth. They alleged that the standard protocols used for the births of William and Kate's children were deliberately bypassed. But the most disturbing element, according to Piers, came from someone he referred to as a medical-adjacent contact. This was not a doctor or nurse, but someone involved in the coordination of private health services for the royals. This person, Piers claimed, noted that there were no records of a royal suite being prepared at Portland Hospital for Meghan. No equipment ordered. No on-call staff briefed for a delivery. Instead, arrangements were allegedly made through third-party providers under non-royal names, an attempt, the source suggested, to keep everything off the books. That's where the story deepens. Because if this allegation is true, that Meghan used a surrogate and orchestrated the illusion of pregnancy, it means the deception wasn't just personal. It was institutional. And if insiders helped shield the truth, it reveals a system willing to lie to the public to protect one of its own. It's not a light accusation. And yet, the response from Harry and Meghan's camp has been silence. No legal threats. No defamation claims. No interviews defending the pregnancy timeline. That silence has only emboldened Piers and those who believe him. Why, they ask, wouldn't Meghan sue immediately to clear her name? Why hasn't she produced medical records, doctor statements, or even a simple acknowledgement of the rumors? One theory is that the legal battle would open doors best left shut. In court, discovery rules would force the Sussexes to hand over documents, communications, medical files. Depositions would be required. Witnesses would be called. And if the surrogate story is true, or if there's even partial truth to it, such a trial could obliterate their credibility permanently. There's also speculation that the palace itself doesn't want the story to explode further. Despite their distance from Harry and Meghan since Megxit, the royal family may still be invested in preserving some degree of dignity for the institution. If it became widely accepted that Meghan faked a pregnancy while serving as a working royal, the backlash wouldn't be limited to her. It would taint the entire monarchy. It would force questions about succession, documentation, and public trust. It could create a constitutional crisis. So, insiders remain hushed. Official channels say nothing. And Piers continues to speak. Some critics say he's exploiting a personal vendetta. Others say he's the only one brave enough to tell the truth. But Piers himself has framed this as bigger than Meghan. In his view, this is about accountability, transparency, and the right of the public to know when they've been misled. As he recounted the details from his sources, Morgan hinted at more to come. He claimed that one of the individuals had access to private messages exchanged between Meghan's team and a photographer during her supposed third trimester. The messages, he says, suggest staged photo sessions, complete with bump prosthetics and camera angles designed to simulate a natural pregnancy. He even implied that some of those photos, if analyzed closely, reveal inconsistencies in lighting and shadowing that suggest digital manipulation. None of this, of course, has been verified independently. The palace refuses to comment. Meghan and Harry have not offered counter-evidence. And yet, the weight of the accusation, combined with the eerie silence from the accused, has created a vacuum into which speculation continues to pour. To many, Piers Morgan's statements feel like the final piece of a puzzle they've been trying to assemble for years. To others, it's another in a long line of targeted attacks against a woman who dared to challenge the status quo. But even Meghan's staunchest defenders admit, the lack of transparency has fueled this fire. This isn't the first time royals have been accused of scandalous behavior, but it may be the first time in modern history where a member of the royal family is accused of orchestrating an illusion that touches on both maternal identity and national symbolism. Meghan's pregnancies weren't just private milestones, they were national events. They came with titles, press coverage, and royal lineage implications. If those pregnancies were, in part, a carefully constructed facade, the betrayal is not just emotional. It's constitutional. Piers ended his segment with a warning. He said he expected backlash, legal threats, and public outrage. But he welcomed it. He insisted that he wasn't afraid of the truth and challenged others to step forward. Former staff, medical professionals, anyone who knew what really happened. Since that broadcast, more insiders have reportedly reached out to journalists and independent investigators. Rumors circulate that a whistleblower from inside the Sussexes' PR team is prepared to speak, someone who allegedly handled email threads related to the surrogate arrangements. There's also buzz that a former hospital employee in Santa Barbara has retained legal counsel to negotiate a media deal. None of these leads have yet resulted in formal publication, but they suggest that the dam is beginning to crack. And if even a fraction of Piers' claims are confirmed, it could force a reckoning not only for Meghan and Harry, but for the system that allowed the narrative to flourish unchecked. For now, the story sits in a kind of suspended reality, too explosive to be ignored, yet too unconfirmed to be fully believed. But one thing is certain, the palace insiders who spoke to Piers have ignited a firestorm. And whether they were telling the truth, embellishing facts, or acting out of disillusionment, they've changed the conversation forever. The public is now listening more closely than ever. To understand how we arrived at this moment, where a surrogate theory about Meghan Markle has sparked international debate, one must follow the breadcrumbs that have been scattered over several years. These weren't loud clues. They didn't come in dramatic declarations or leaked medical reports. They came in glimpses. Photographs, videos, body language, inconsistencies. Small things. Tiny cracks in a carefully curated story. But when placed in sequence, they form a timeline that paints a far more suspicious picture than anyone expected. The first major clue came in October 2018, the day the pregnancy was announced. It wasn't the announcement itself that raised questions, it was the timing. Meghan and Harry arrived in Australia for their royal tour, and mere hours after landing, the news broke. The royal family, known for timing announcements with precision, released the information without warning. Even journalists on the royal beat were caught off guard. Why announce the pregnancy at the very start of a physically demanding international tour, critics wondered, instead of waiting until they returned? In hindsight, some suggest the announcement was meant to distract from increasing tensions behind palace walls. Meghan had reportedly clashed with staff members in the lead-up to the wedding. Stories of demanding behavior and feuds with Kate Middleton were beginning to leak. By announcing the pregnancy, the couple shifted the narrative instantly, putting the spotlight on a joyful event and shielding Meghan from deeper scrutiny. But scrutiny was only delayed. Throughout the Australia tour, Meghan's appearance changed dramatically. In some photos, she appeared barely pregnant. In others, she looked as though she was already into her second trimester. The size of her bump fluctuated, sometimes even within the same day. Social media exploded with side-by-side comparisons that made it clear something was off. In one photo from a beach visit, Meghan's stomach was completely flat. Just hours later, at a formal dinner, she looked heavily pregnant. Medical professionals and mothers began to comment online, many saying they had never seen such inconsistencies in the physical presentation of a pregnancy. But each time the conversation started to build, it was dismissed as toxic speculation or labeled as a sexist attack. The media, still largely supportive at the time, steered clear of publishing the public's growing doubts. Then came the now infamous incident at the Mayhew Animal Welfare charity visit in January 2019. Meghan, wearing a beige coat and high heels, bent down to pet a dog. As she squatted, her baby bump appeared to collapse inward before folding unnaturally at the waist. The video went viral. Commenters slowed it down frame by frame. Some swore they saw a prosthetic move. Others said it was just fabric. But it wasn't just the movement, it was the look on Meghan's face, as though she realized what had happened. This single clip became the centerpiece of online theories. People began investigating every appearance Meghan made. They began cataloging bump shapes, sizes, and positions. A photo from a gala event in late February showed her belly appearing more square than round. Another image from March displayed what looked like a seam line under her dress, one that didn't match any visible maternity wear but did align with prosthetic support harnesses used in the entertainment industry. A woman claiming to be a maternity nurse anonymously posted a video analysis on YouTube. She noted that Meghan's bump often shifted position when she walked, suggesting it wasn't secured to her body as a real pregnancy would be. She also noted the absence of certain physical changes typically seen during late pregnancy: swelling in the face, feet, and hands, altered posture, and the natural discomfort most pregnant women show when standing for long periods. Meghan, on the other hand, moved fluidly, wore stilettos well into her third trimester, and often crouched or knelt without hesitation. By the time Meghan and Harry were due to welcome Archie in May 2019, doubt had grown into quiet conviction among certain online circles. Yet the palace did nothing to address the concerns. There was no formal birth plan disclosed, no acknowledgement of a hospital visit, no detail about doctors or delivery. When Archie's arrival was announced, it was hours after the alleged birth, and reports were contradictory. Some said Meghan had gone into labor that morning. Others claimed the baby was already born. A royal correspondent, speaking anonymously to an independent podcast, revealed that no media were alerted to Meghan's hospital admission. In fact, he claimed, they weren't even sure she had been admitted at all. Portland Hospital, where Archie was allegedly born, refused to comment. No staff members appeared in public. No doctor spoke out. 2 days after Archie's birth, Meghan and Harry staged their photo op inside Windsor Castle. Unlike Kate and Diana, who posed outside the hospital within hours, Meghan appeared in a tightly controlled environment. There were no crowds, no paparazzi, only a hand-picked camera crew and a couple of royal reporters allowed to ask scripted questions. In the photo, Meghan wore a pristine white trench dress. Her skin was flawless, her hair styled, her smile radiant. Her belly still protruded slightly, but it lacked the expected sagging or swelling seen postpartum. Women who had given birthdays earlier noticed the absence of common postpartum signs: tired eyes, puffiness, milk stains, or awkward body language while holding a newborn. Meghan stood tall and confident, without a trace of the exhaustion that comes after labor or surgery. This only added fuel to the fire. Over the next few months, Meghan's reappearances were minimal. When she was seen, Archie was rarely with her. When he did appear, It was in abstract photos, his hand touching a leaf, his foot in a sandal, his head turned away. Critics began asking why no clear family portraits were released. Why were the Sussexes so secretive about their child's appearance? The timeline became even stranger in 2020. As the couple stepped down from their royal duties and moved to North America, Archie essentially vanished from public life. When the couple launched their Archewell brand and began releasing content, Archie's presence remained heavily filtered, both literally and figuratively. In their 2020 Christmas card, Archie was shown as a cartoon rendering. In a later podcast, his voice was heard, but only briefly and heavily edited. Then came the second pregnancy. In early 2021, Meghan and Harry released a dreamy black and white photo announcing baby number 2. Meghan's bump was again on full display, though the angle made it hard to assess size or shape. She was barefoot, reclining on the grass, smiling at the sky. The photo looked more like an advertisement for organic tea than a royal pregnancy announcement. There were no dates, no hospital plans, and no follow-up photos. In March of that year, during the now infamous Oprah Winfrey interview, Meghan claimed to be well into her second pregnancy. Yet, once again, her physical appearance remained curiously static. In some shots, the bump was small. In others, she looked near-term. The Oprah interview drew worldwide attention for many reasons: racism, isolation, mental health, but in surrogacy discussion circles, the interview also provided a crucial clue. During a segment in which Oprah asked about her upcoming delivery, Meghan again offered no medical specifics. There was no mention of a birthing plan, no expected delivery date, no insights into how this experience differed from her first. In hindsight, critics say her answers were vague by design. When Lilibet was born in June 2021, the birth was once again handled with extreme secrecy. There were no photos, no videos, no mention of a delivery doctor or hospital staff. The couple simply issued a press release hours after the fact, saying their daughter had arrived peacefully in California. The only photo of Lilibet to emerge in the first few months came much later, and again, it was highly stylized. The child, barely visible, was perched on a blanket, gazing into the distance. The lighting was soft. The mood was ethereal. But once again, questions arose. Was the child's appearance accurate for her supposed age? Why was she so absent from the family's public life? And why did Meghan avoid ever discussing her labor? To this day, there are no hospital records publicly verified for either child. No signed statements from doctors or midwives. No independent confirmation that Meghan ever entered labor. And that, perhaps more than anything, is the center of the conspiracy timeline. These clues, taken in isolation, might be dismissed. But together, they tell a story that is hard to ignore. A story of control, of secrecy, of appearances that don't quite match reality. A story where each step, each photo, each press release seems more like a curated performance than a transparent journey. This is what Piers Morgan, and countless others now demanding answers, are focused on. Not a single moment of deception, but a long, slow, deliberate trail of choices that, when pieced together, may reveal the greatest royal mystery of the modern era. It's one thing to tell a story. It's another thing entirely to sell it so convincingly that millions accept it without question. For years, Meghan Markle and Prince Harry managed to do just that: create and sustain a powerful narrative that blended royal glamour, personal struggle, and social justice into a seemingly authentic fairy tale. But behind every headline, every filtered Instagram photo, and every heartfelt interview was a complex web of media strategy. And now, in light of recent accusations, that web is being torn apart thread by thread. From the moment Meghan entered the royal orbit, she brought with her the polish and precision of Hollywood media coaching. She wasn't just stepping into royal life. She was stepping into a stage that demanded a different kind of performance, one that had to appear spontaneous, noble, and vulnerable all at once. What followed wasn't accidental. It was calculated. The pregnancy narrative was, for lack of a better term, a masterclass in perception management. From the start, Meghan's bump became a media magnet. Paparazzi clamored for photos. Tabloids speculated on due dates. Fashion magazines dissected her maternity wardrobe. But what very few people noticed at the time was how closely her image was being controlled. Photo opportunities were limited to select angles. Appearances were timed carefully. Interviews were tightly scripted. Rarely, if ever, did Meghan speak openly or unguardedly about the details of her pregnancy. It was all vague. High-level sentiment, excitement, gratitude, hope for the future. That control wasn't accidental. It was strategic. According to insiders, Meghan and Harry had a strict policy of approving any photo before it could be published, an unprecedented level of control for working royals. Traditional media outlets, used to being granted access in exchange for coverage, were increasingly shut out. In their place were hand-picked photographers and friendly platforms. This shift created a closed loop. Meghan's image was only seen through the lens she approved. One example of this manipulation came during the official pregnancy portraits. While Kate Middleton and Princess Diana were often photographed candidly during their pregnancies, Meghan's portraits were always pristine, styled to perfection, and heavily edited. Lighting was soft. Backgrounds were blurred. Her bump was always positioned at just the right angle, hands delicately cradling it like a glowing orb. These photos were less about documenting a personal milestone and more about cultivating a brand. Then there was the Oprah interview, perhaps the most consequential media moment of their entire narrative. Marketed as an explosive tell-all, it promised revelations and raw emotion. And in many ways, it delivered. Meghan spoke of suicidal thoughts, institutional neglect, and racism within the royal family. But buried within that emotional testimony was a glaring absence: specificity. When it came to her pregnancies, Meghan offered almost nothing. No due dates. No doctors. No hospitals. No birth plans. She spoke emotionally, but vaguely. It was all feeling, no fact. Why? Critics argue that this vagueness wasn't a coincidence. It was a tactic. By keeping details vague, she avoided scrutiny. She created a buffer zone where questions could be dismissed as intrusive and speculation could be deflected as racism or misogyny. It was a powerful shield, and for a time, it worked. But now, with the surrogate accusations gaining traction, that shield is cracking. People are going back to those interviews, those photos, and those public appearances. They're rewatching every moment with a new lens. And what they're seeing isn't spontaneity. It's choreography. Consider how carefully timed each media release was. The pregnancy announcement came just before a major royal tour. The second pregnancy was announced on the same day as Princess Diana's pregnancy anniversary. The photo of Lilibet was released during the Queen's Platinum Jubilee. Every moment was carefully chosen to hijack the narrative, to redirect media cycles, to steal oxygen from other royal events. This media manipulation wasn't just about publicity, it was about control. Meghan and Harry no longer trusted traditional media to tell their story. So they created their own platforms, their own production deals, their own docuseries. By doing so, they ensured that only their version of events reached the public. And that's where things get dangerous. When public figures control every angle of their narrative, they create a version of reality that can't be challenged. They become immune to accountability. Questions become attacks. Doubt becomes hate. And the public, conditioned to trust curated perfection, becomes complicit. But perfection doesn't leave room for truth. The media, for its part, played along. Early on, Meghan was lauded by nearly every outlet: Vogue, Vanity Fair, The New York Times. Even traditionally critical publications held back. There was a fear, spoken and unspoken, that any criticism of Meghan would be interpreted as racist or sexist. Editors were cautious. Writers were told to tread lightly. The result? An echo chamber of praise, devoid of real scrutiny. This media complicity allowed the pregnancy narrative to go unchallenged. It wasn't until independent voices, bloggers, YouTubers, and eventually Piers Morgan began asking the uncomfortable questions that the illusion began to crumble. And now, those questions are impossible to ignore. Why were the pregnancies so tightly controlled? Why was there never any confirmation from hospitals or medical professionals? Why were the children hidden for so long? Why was every photo so heavily stylized? And most importantly, why did the media go along with it? Some argue that the public was played, that they were sold a story designed to protect Meghan's brand, rather than reflect reality. That behind the perfectly framed bump photos was a deeper truth, one the public was never meant to see. Others say the media simply did its job, respecting privacy and avoiding unfounded speculation. But the line between respect and complicity is thin. And in this case, it may have been crossed. The rise of social media further complicated things. Meghan and Harry began bypassing traditional outlets altogether. They released statements via Archwell. They shared photos on Instagram. They curated their own narrative in a way no royal couple had ever done before. It was revolutionary and, for a while, effective. But with that control came consequences. By shutting out traditional media, they also shut out accountability. There were no journalists asking tough questions, no fact-checkers, no editors, just a polished brand feeding a hungry audience. And now, that audience is waking up. They're realizing that what they saw may not have been real. That the bump photos, the glowing interviews, the tightly framed family portraits may have all been part of a calculated illusion. They're asking whether Meghan Markle manipulated the media or whether the media allowed itself to be manipulated. And that question cuts to the core of this entire controversy. If Meghan did use a surrogate, and if she went to great lengths to hide that fact, then the media became her unwitting accomplice. They helped sell a false narrative. They printed the photos. They ran the stories. They silenced the critics. And now, as the truth edges closer to the surface, they must reckon with their role. This isn't just a scandal about one woman. It's a scandal about an entire system. A system where truth is malleable, where image is everything, where carefully staged photos matter more than facts, where the public, desperate for a fairy tale, is willing to suspend disbelief. But that suspension is over. People are demanding answers. They're demanding transparency. And they're no longer content with curated perfection. They want the truth, however messy, however uncomfortable it may be. Because in the end, the truth always matters more than the story. Silence speaks volumes. And when the silence is coming from Buckingham Palace, the heart of the most scrutinized monarchy on earth, it speaks louder than any official statement ever could. Since the first whispers of Meghan Markle's pregnancy inconsistencies surfaced, the royal institution has adopted a policy of near-total silence. No confirmations, no denials, no clarifications. And now, even as one of the most high-profile media figures in the United Kingdom has publicly accused Meghan of faking both of her pregnancies, the palace continues to say nothing. Why? That question haunts royal watchers, fuels conspiracy theorists, and agitates journalists who have spent years navigating the monarchy's careful and deliberate communication strategy. Because historically, the British royal family knows the value of a statement. And just as importantly, it knows the weight of silence. Buckingham Palace does not operate like a traditional political institution. It is not bound by transparency laws. It doesn't issue spontaneous rebuttals. When it speaks, it is because it wants to. When it remains silent, it is because it deems the situation either beneath response or too dangerous to touch. And in this case, it's becoming increasingly clear that the latter may be true. To understand the silence, one must understand the context. The royal family operates on precedent, tradition, and a desire for continuity. It has survived abdications, divorces, wars, and scandals by presenting a united front and rarely engaging in public disputes. Even during Princess Diana's explosive interviews in the 1990s, where she revealed the extent of her emotional suffering, her bulimia, and her husband's affair, the palace said little. And when it did speak, the statements were measured, indirect, and dripping with restraint. So when the accusations against Meghan began to build, not from anonymous Twitter accounts, but from respected voices like Piers Morgan, many expected the palace to at least release a symbolic statement, perhaps something affirming their trust in Harry and Meghan's word, or a line supporting a woman's right to medical privacy. But nothing came, not a whisper, not even a leak through the usual media channels. That decision, whether intentional or passive, has raised red flags. Because this is not a fringe allegation. This is an accusation that strikes at the very heart of royal protocol, lineage, succession, and legitimacy. If Meghan did not give birth to Archie and Lilibet, and if that fact was knowingly concealed by senior royals or advisors, then the institution itself becomes complicit. And that level of complicity would be catastrophic, not just in terms of public trust, but in terms of constitutional structure. It's not simply a matter of bad press. It's a matter of public deception on a grand scale. And yet, the palace remains mute. Some royal insiders believe the silence is driven by a desire to protect the monarchy's long-term image. By engaging with the allegations, the palace would be forced to acknowledge them, thus giving them more oxygen. There's a belief among senior courtiers that the best way to handle controversy is to let it burn out. But this isn't burning out. It's spreading. There's also the possibility that the palace is silenced by its own secrets. If there were private agreements made with Harry and Meghan regarding their pregnancies, if the royal institution knew about a surrogate arrangement and agreed to help maintain the illusion, then a statement would open the floodgates. It would require admissions, timelines, documentation. It would require explaining why they allowed the public to believe a version of events that wasn't true. Such a scandal would shatter the idea of royal integrity. It would invite investigations, media frenzies, and possibly even constitutional challenges. Another theory is that the palace is simply caught in a trap of its own making. When Meghan and Harry announced they would be stepping back from royal duties in early 2020, they negotiated terms that granted them independence but left certain lines of communication intact. While they were no longer senior working royals, they still retained their titles. Their children, as descendants of the monarch, retained places in the line of succession. That gave Meghan and Harry a foot in both worlds, royal enough to demand deference, but private enough to reject scrutiny. This in-between status has made it nearly impossible for the palace to act decisively. On one hand, if they speak out to defend Meghan, they risk alienating loyal supporters who believe she has already damaged the monarchy's reputation. On the other, if they refute her or even suggest uncertainty, they risk further damaging the fractured relationship with Prince Harry, a relationship already hanging by a thread. So they do nothing. But the consequences of that nothing are growing. The public is not blind. The internet has democratized information in ways the royal family is still struggling to understand. Questions that once died in hushed conversations now live permanently online, dissected in video essays, podcasts, and comment sections. Silence is no longer the neutral strategy it once was. In today's environment, silence reads as guilt. And this isn't the first time the palace's silence has been interpreted that way. When Harry and Meghan made explosive claims in their Oprah interview that a senior royal had questioned the skin tone of their unborn child, that Meghan was denied mental health support, that security was stripped unfairly, the palace released a brief, bland statement saying recollections may vary. That phrase, intended to create distance without confrontation, became a meme. It also infuriated those who expected more transparency. Now, as Piers Morgan leads a public charge demanding answers about Meghan's pregnancies, the palace has chosen not even to offer a recollections may vary rebuttal. They've simply ignored it. Why? Perhaps because acknowledging Piers would elevate him to the role of legitimate accuser. Perhaps because they fear what else he may reveal. Or perhaps because they still hope the storm will pass. But it won't. Not this time. Not when the questions involve whether the sixth and seventh in line to the British throne were born under false pretenses. Not when the allegations go beyond private scandal and venture into national deception. The cost of silence may be greater than the cost of disclosure. Some royal advisors are reportedly pushing for an internal investigation. They argue that transparency now could save the monarchy from greater damage later. Others say it's already too late. That the moment to address the rumors passed years ago, when the first bump videos emerged and were dismissed as internet garbage. And then there's the issue of Harry. Many believe that any official statement, supportive or critical, would risk alienating the Duke of Sussex permanently. If the palace defends Meghan too forcefully, they risk aligning themselves with a narrative that may eventually unravel. If they distance themselves, they risk pushing Harry further away, possibly into legal action or public retaliation. It's a delicate balance. But the silence is beginning to look less like caution and more like cowardice. Because in the absence of facts, speculation thrives. And in the absence of leaders, the royal family, above all else, relies on the illusion of permanence. The Queen's reign was defined by stoicism, tradition, and quiet dignity. But in a world of viral video and 24-hour outrage, silence is no longer synonymous with dignity. It's synonymous with evasion. And right now, the public isn't asking for gossip. They're asking for clarity. Were proper records kept? Were protocols followed? Were the photographs authentic? Were the royal communications truthful? The palace's refusal to answer those questions is not protecting the crown. It's weakening it. At some point, the monarchy must realize that silence in the face of a storm doesn't make the storm disappear. It only makes the house look more fragile. And as public scrutiny grows, as journalists dig deeper, as more insiders prepare to speak, the cost of that silence grows heavier by the day. It's the scandal that won't fade. Long after the initial media frenzy, long after social media tired itself into exhaustion debating over pixelated photographs and conflicting hospital reports, the core question remains unanswered. Did Meghan Markle? If anything, it's intensified. From body language experts to medical professionals, digital sleuths to former palace aides, the internet has become a sprawling courtroom, and the jury is still very much out. One thing is clear, this is no longer just about a single accusation made by a polarizing media figure. It is about the full weight of what that accusation implies. And the voices entering the conversation now are not YouTubers or trolls. They are royal historians, constitutional scholars, and investigative journalists who, until recently, avoided the subject altogether. The tide is turning. Among the first to weigh in with academic credibility was a retired courtier who served under both Queen Elizabeth II and King Charles. In an anonymous op-ed published by a respected European newspaper, he stated unequivocally that if Meghan had used a surrogate and deliberately concealed it, it would amount to a breach of the trust afforded to any royal family member involved in matters of succession. The courtier elaborated that lineage, when it comes to the monarchy, is not simply ceremonial, it is the lifeblood of legitimacy. And any lie about that process compromises not just public opinion, but legal inheritance, royal titles, and constitutional balance. Shortly after, a former BBC royal correspondent, who had covered the Windsor family for over 2 decades, publicly admitted on a podcast that there had always been quiet disquiet within the royal press pool about Meghan's pregnancies. "We were discouraged from digging," he said. "There was a lot of pressure to play nice, to toe the line. But if we're being honest, there were discrepancies that no one could reconcile." It was a stunning admission, not just because of who said it, but because of what it revealed, that mainstream media outlets had either been willfully blind or had knowingly participated in a form of complicity. The deeper you dig, the clearer it becomes. Even those within the system felt something was being hidden. The list of revelations continues to grow. A former maternity nurse, now retired and based in Surrey, gave an off-the-record interview to an independent journalist. She detailed what she described as highly unusual inconsistencies in Meghan's physical behavior during the latter part of her first pregnancy. The way she walked, sat, carried herself, it just didn't match what you see in third-trimester women, she said. Her balance was off, but not in the way pregnancy usually affects it. It looked rehearsed, like someone mimicking what they think pregnancy should look like. Then came the damning photo evidence, an obscure set of paparazzi images taken in 2019, buried deep in digital archives and largely forgotten until resurfaced by a royal researcher. The images show Meghan stepping out of a car at an event, her dress pulled taut across her stomach. But under intense enhancement, a subtle line is visible running across the curvature of her belly. Not a crease in fabric, a seam. A horizontal ridge that appears consistent with the structure of wearable bump prosthetics used in film and stage productions. The kind that bend, but don't stretch. The kind that fold. Still, the question remains, why would she do it? That question has troubled even Meghan's fiercest critics. If true, the deception would serve no logical end unless it was part of something far more deliberate than privacy. One popular theory among former palace aides is that Meghan, conscious of the scrutiny she would face as a pregnant duchess, opted for a surrogate out of both personal comfort and privacy, but felt compelled to simulate the experience publicly to preserve her role within the royal narrative. If that's true, it suggests not malice, but strategy. Royal expert and historian Dr. Alice Everstone puts it this way: the monarchy is built on image. Meghan and Harry were crafting a new image for themselves, modern, relatable, independent. But pregnancy, especially within the firm, is not just personal. It's performative. People want to see the journey, the bump, the hospital steps, the celebration. If you take that away, you risk being seen as too distant, too opaque. And that's exactly what she couldn't afford. But if her intent was to control the narrative, the control is now slipping. The public is asking sharper questions, demanding deeper transparency, and turning against those who once enjoyed unwavering loyalty. Meanwhile, silence from Meghan and Harry has evolved into strategic absence. Their once frequent public appearances have slowed. The Archwell platform, which once published updates weekly, has gone quiet. Their Spotify and Netflix deals are being renegotiated or quietly dissolved. The couple, once the darlings of progressive royalty, now find themselves at the edge of public goodwill. Some claim they're preparing for a legal fight. Others believe they're bracing for more leaks. But no one truly knows. Behind the scenes, royal family members are said to be growing uneasy. According to multiple sources close to Windsor insiders, King Charles has held more than one private meeting discussing potential reputational damage stemming from unverified claims related to Meghan's pregnancies. Prince William, once thought to be on ice-cold terms with Harry, has reportedly urged his father to issue a neutralizing statement, not to defend Meghan, but to protect the sanctity of the crown. And then there are the children. Archie and Lilibet are growing up in the center of a global identity crisis. Every photo of them, every appearance, every utterance of their names carries the burden of unproven doubt. If they were indeed born via surrogate, then the scandal is not their fault. But the longer their parents remain silent, the more damage is done, not just to them, but to their position within royal history. Already, some scholars are raising the issue of succession. If the pregnancies were faked, and no legal surrogacy arrangements were documented within the United Kingdom or the United States, questions arise about eligibility for titles, inheritance, and place in the line of succession. It's a legal and constitutional quagmire, and one that royal lawyers are reportedly examining closely behind closed doors. Still, no one will speak on the record. Not Harry, not Meghan, not the palace. Which brings us full circle. A question once whispered by online conspiracy theorists has become a matter of public interest. A story once dismissed as tabloid fiction has evolved into a serious reputational risk for the most famous family on Earth. And it all began with a few awkward photos, a folded bump, and a media figure unafraid to say what others would not. So where does that leave us? Some believe the truth will eventually come out, that an insider will leak a document, that a medical professional will go public, that a court case will force discovery. Others think it will remain buried forever, another mystery added to the royal vault. But what's already clear is this: the public has changed. The media has changed. The monarchy has changed. And whatever the truth behind Meghan Markle's pregnancies, the consequences are all